Welcome to Bonehead Weekly, and this topic is a little different for us, but kind of similar.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we've
You want
already.
me to talk? Oh,
Yeah,
yeah. Go ahead, Chad.
Where's
no,
Burber?
I was going to say we've already done a topic similar to this, but in a different way.
Yeah. So we talked previously. We did an episode. This would be, by the way, if we would have done any research at all, where we'd say episode blah blah blah. Check it out if you haven't watched it. But we don't do that in comic books. This would be where there'd be a little asterisk, and then like at the bottom it would say see issue blah blah blah. We didn't do any of that. I'm sure Chad's looking it up right now, or he's just googling something. He's doing something. I can tell. But anyway, while he does that, what we're going to talk about. So previously we talked about biopics, films about people that had not been made that we thought should be made about individuals. And a while back, we did a full episode of Good Movie Monday with Glenn and Ben. If
Yeah.
you're not aware, we do shorts for them, short segments we call Bonehead Fun Sides. Fun Sides? I messed that all up. Funsies. No. And but we did a full episode with them, and in the episode, we each spent what about 7 minutes, I think, talking about one thing in films that we would like to see, or that we wouldn't like to see, or what have you. And what I talked about was we keep getting the same historical eras of pictures, right? We get Rome, we get Greek, a little bit of Greek mythology usually. We get Civil War era, but there's all this other time. There is a wealth of time that's behind us. And we don't get a lot of films that break out of those molds, right? It's like, oh, well, let's talk about Civil War. Let's talk about
Mhm.
the Roman Empire. Let's talk about the Greeks. Let's talk. We don't, there were other things going on. When the Greeks were doing their things, there were Aborigines in Australia doing something. Why don't we talk about them? So there's all this other history. And so for my brief segment, I talked about, hey, why aren't we doing films about other people, about other places, about stuff like that? And at that point, and this is where I have to give Glenn credit, Glenn said that could be an entire Bonehead episode. And so when we were talking about what should we do an episode about, well, we're lazy, lazy men. And I said, why don't we just do what Glenn said and just do that
I'm
as an episode?
tired.
Yeah.
I'm so tired.
It's hard work, and Chad still hasn't found it, have you, Chad? It's not
No,
there. You're still
no.
looking. It's
And
out
I
in
was
the ether.
completely blanking out on what you said, and I'm like, did I actually miss the point of this episode? So we'll find out. I'm not going first.
Well, I'll
Well,
go first. I don't mind.
sure.
And so we
Oh,
could do a,
historical figures who should have a movie, episode 294.
Episode 294, fans. Actually, if you're a true fan, you already knew that.
yeah. Clearly, we're not true fans.
That's for the fans to just.
That's for the fan to
which
decide.
we
Go
put,
get
which
them,
we
Marianne or Barbara.
we did almost a year ago, guys. I thought we did that like 3 months ago. It was almost a year ago.
Oh, no, I knew it was a
I think it
while
was more than
ago.
3 months, but
See,
yeah.
Chad, hold on. For every season, turn, turn, turn,
I thought you were going to say there's the reason.
turn, turn, turn.
I got your reason for your season.
Is it Santa?
Maybe. So
Awesome.
we can do events, right?
Yeah, no, events, eras, people, whatever you want to
I,
do.
Because
w- I
I
was going to
had,
say, I was going to say, I actually did historical moments, but I on
Is
my
it like when you met me?
that's a tragedy.
I did say it had to be a good moment.
I will say
Hey,
for
here's a tragedy for you.
my last pick, I did pick a person just because of the historical significance of it.
well, I did
So
events. And my first one, I'll go first. So
uh,
everybody go ahead.
I don't give a shit.
Well, then tune out. Come back when we're done.
Tune in, turn out, drop out. What is it?
Don't tell him when we're done. I'm going to switch us to speaker. So the one I want to talk about is, and forgive me if I've mentioned it on here or if we did it during our historical figures one, but there is shit about, and I feel like I've mentioned it before, but the War of 1812 has so few books, movies, anything about it. It's like it's basically the second American, second war with Britain, and there's not really shit about it. In fact, so much so because I was getting ready for this, I wanted to pull it up on Wikipedia. There is actually one, two, three, seven. Wikipedia can only find 11 movies of all time that basically deal with the War of 1812. I'm not going to read them all. A couple of the bigger ones are Captain Caution, The Buccaneer, Last of the Buccaneers, Mohawk, Mutiny, Tecumseh, We Shall Run, Old Ironsides. Those are basically all we have when it comes to the War of 1812. And I bet most people don't even know jack crap about the War of
And
1812.
I'm pretty sure most of those are historically inaccurate about the War of 1812.
I've never seen them. I wouldn't know.
Okay.
But War of 1812, they burnt down the damn White House. The British invaded and burnt Washington.
Mhm.
We don't really talk about it. It's just like when we were talking about a little, and this is where I think I may have it in my cross, but several episodes, we were talking about COVID and the art that'll come out of that. But there's not really a lot of art that come out of the Spanish flu. I mean, you know what I mean? There's just not a lot of movies about that and people wearing masks and death. We see some art, but there's not a lot of movies or stories about it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there's a lot of, and you could do a lot. You could also focus on 1812 of a lot of the shit that a lot of the awful shit that Andrew Jackson did down in Louisiana. It's awful. Yeah.
I don't know anything about it, but War of 1812 was our allies against Britain, and it basically ended with the Treaty of Ghent. That's right, which was signed in 1814 in December, but actually didn't really get ratified, and we fought 3 more months till September 1850, February 17th, 1815. And it's kind of convoluted of actually how the war got started. If you want to go through the history, I'm not going to do that. If you're looking for a history, we normally will do it, but more in movies. Why? Why do we not talk about it? And I bet you most of our listeners don't know jack shit about it. We'll talk about World War II. We glaze over World War One. We clearly, if you're raised in the South, get a shit ton of education about the Civil War, and then a shit ton about the American Revolution, and then we kind of glaze over Vietnam.
Well, there's a lot of Vietnam movies.
There's
Yeah.
a ton of Vietnam movies. I'm talking about our history.
Oh yeah,
There is
yeah.
nothing about the war. There's
Well,
a
that's
ton of movies
because
about World War II, ton of movies about the Revolution, ton of movies about the Civil War, ton of movies
Well,
about
because
Vietnam.
the 1812 was the follow up to
it's
the
a
to
sequel.
the War of Independence, and it wasn't as spectacular.
It's the
Well,
Sting
yes,
2
but
of Sting
it-
movies.
World War One led to World War II.
But I was gonna say, what's prequel?
But-
That's the
Well,
prequel instead of the
Yeah,
sequel.
very
Yeah.
By that
Yeah,
rationale.
yeah. Yeah. Well, see, but by the way, I want to point that out because I think what you're onto is really important. In that, I think one of the reasons that Vietnam gets glazed over because we're
It
of
gets
a
glazed
certain
over
age.
historically, but you both are
Yeah.
right. There is a ton of art about Vietnam.
But we're of a certain age as well. Vietnam wasn't a war when I was a kid. Remember, it was a police
Yeah,
It's a
action.
police action.
Yeah,
They went out of
because
their way to say
And
it was a
also,
police action.
technically, we lost. That's why you don't get a lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
don't cover it.
but I can always remember it was, and the fact that they didn't have to give certain services to
Mhm.
veterans because it wasn't a war; it was a police action.
Yeah.
and all of that, and I can remember it's been retroactively, I guess, declared a war. But yeah, now so there's that entire point too that it's been within the last 20 years, 15 years, it's been declared a war long
Yeah.
after it was
I
over.
didn't know that it was officially declared a war. If you want to know the truth, I didn't know that at all. I'm with you all. I thought it was still considered a police action.
Let me see if I can find out because I remember
There's even
reading
the joke in Good Morning Vietnam where he says something about war. He says, "No, no, 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 no. No, this is an actual police action. This isn't a war."
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, but so I think that's a good point though. That as far as what you were saying is there's so much of this that's easy to glaze over because it's honestly when I was a kid, people didn't want to talk about Vietnam, and I'm not that old. I mean, I'm old, but I'm not that
Yeah.
old.
No, they didn't.
But also with back to your question about the War of 1812. The War of 1812, you got to also think about the reason why the War of 18, not only was it the sequel, it didn't involve the major characters, Washington, Jefferson. It didn't involve any of those characters. It involved Monroe, a little bit of Jackson, but nobody wants to cover what Jackson did because what Andrew Jackson did was absolutely terrible.
Actually,
was
I just read
nightmares.
there's a book called The Indigenous History of the United States. I just
Mhm.
read it over the last few days. It totally covers it, Chad.
Yeah. He was awful during that time. So yeah, there was a lot of awful shit we did during the War of 1812, and
You're
they don't
right,
want
by
to
the
cover
way.
it.
I'm sorry, Joe. I'm sorry, Chad. You are right, Joe. Actually, I was wrong. They still technically have never declared Vietnam a war in the United States.
In
Yeah.
the United States. Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that's partially why 1812 isn't covered as much.
But there's no art to it. There's no we don't do movies, and thus it's been lost to except for the educated. And I shouldn't say educated. This isn't because our definition of educated is probably slightly different than what it actually is.
Well, no, I think I'm relatively educated. I have a doctorate, but I would argue you're right in that I know the War of 1812 happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't. I remembered the Treaty of Ghent after I read it and was like, oh, yeah, I remember Ghent, but I don't know if you'd have made me write it down, I would have remembered any of that.
Yeah.
Well, and what's funny is I say the history of education. Do you know how often the War of 1812 comes up? And I'll use John Thielen's, which is a great book, History of American Education. You know how often the War of 1812 is mentioned in that book?
Zero?
I think it comes up once, but it doesn't say what effect it had on education. It was like we had this huge Revolutionary War. All of a sudden, these colonial royal charters, because every school had a royal charter or a charter that was approved by the royal court at least, and then they didn't mean anything. And then 1812, like it's like, and then there was the War of 1812, and I think that's honestly what it says. That caused additional disruption, and then we move on. Like it doesn't even. So I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. And so my point was, I consider myself somewhat educated with a doctorate, but I think even then, right? It's unless history is your thing, and
Yeah.
American history at that, you might miss it.
Yeah. All right, that one's mine.
James, you want to go? Or you
Yeah,
want me
I'll
to go?
go because this is one, gentleman. I'll be honest, I didn't want to talk about anything near the Civil War at all, and I'm not going to talk about the Civil War.
I'm not either.
I'm going to talk about an after effect of the Civil War that I don't know why we don't have this movie. Why do we have 11 billion? That's not the actual numbers, but we have a ton of movies about the Titanic. We have movies about the Lusitania. Why do we not have a movie about the Sultana, the greatest maritime disaster of all time, and there's
Yeah.
not a single movie about it? And
I don't know really that much about it, James.
it's because Abraham Lincoln went to a went to a theater. That's
Yep.
why we know nothing about it. That's why it's not even taught about, but it's one of the greatest. I just you if you did this as a film, that the pathos and ethos and oh, there's so much to do there. So the story of the Sultana is that it was a steamship originally made and to transport southern cotton north. Well, there was this conflict that I said I want to dwell on, but it happened, and then that war ended, and the Sultana, the captain of the Sultana, realized that when the war ended, he picked up a ton of newspapers because he knew his boat was faster than the early telegraph, especially between the North and the South. So, I'm sorry, not when the war ended, when Lincoln was shot.
Mm-hmm.
And so he grabbed the newspapers. He knew he was going back down. And as he went back down, spreading the news, handing out newspapers saying the president's been shot, the president's been shot, somebody stopped and went, hey, with the war over, we've got all these POWs. And the union has said, if you'll bring them back safely, we'll pay $250 a head for the soldiers and $8 for every officer. And I'm not going to do the money equation, but it was a lot, right? That'd be quite a chunk of change, especially if you have been aboard a steamship trying to make ends meet during a war.
Yeah.
So the ship was from 1848. It had a bad steamer. It used 4 steam engines to power it up the river when it was going against the stream. One of them had started to go bad. So he said, hey, I need a repair done on this. And the guy came in and goes, we really need to replace this. And he goes, I don't want to do that because I want to get these prisoners that I'm going to get paid for back north. Patch it. Well, it didn't go well. And on top of that, people want to talk about the Titanic. This is how overloaded this was. I'm trying to make sure I get my number. So the absolute capacity, the crew of the ship was registered as 87. At capacity, the boat was never supposed to hold more than 376 passengers. because they were going to get paid for every POW they brought back, and they were trying to clear out the POW camp. The ship was carrying 2,128 people, most of them freed POWs. When not one boiler, but three of the four boilers exploded all at once. Now, some conspiracy theorists think that actually the guy that did it, that the quote unquote repairman that
Was a
came,
Nazi.
yes, he was a time traveling Nazi that also hated the North.
Knew it.
Um, but
There was a reason why Dial of Destiny was a true story.
that's right, Chad. Uh, of those people,
Thank you, Freddie.
1,167 died in the greatest maritime disaster of all time. That's right. Gordon Lightfoot didn't sing a lick about the Sultana. Santana didn't sing about the Sultana either, for that matter.
No, he just
because
teamed up with Rob Thomas. Ugh.
but it all got overshadowed because Lincoln had been assassinated. But it is the greatest maritime disaster ever, and the amount of POWs that died that were Northern POWs that were being shipped home was over 1,000. I mean, just over 1,000 gone, and it's never mentioned. Nobody ever talks about it, and so there's so even if you wanted to do the conspiracy theory movie that it was it was a Southern repairman who hated the Yankees and he's or if you don't want to do it that way and just think it was overloaded and those steamers were having a harder time, the steam engines were having a harder time pushing up, that works as well. But what the drama of being a freed POW after being, because if you know anything about the conditions in a POW camp in the American Civil War,
Especially in the South.
in the South, when they were losing and they didn't have enough food for themselves sometimes, it wasn't a groovy scene.
No.
So yeah, the Sultana is one of the greatest historical stories about the loss of POWs, about the loss of that's never been told in film, and quite frankly, very rarely even in books, because it's overshadowed by the killing of Lincoln. And I'm not saying the killing of Lincoln wasn't a tragedy, but somebody should tell a story about 1,127 POWs that died just trying to get home, and the greedy sea captain or the greedy boat captain that was just trying to get $8 for each officer, $2 per
That's a good one.
normal soldier. So yep, there you go. The Sultana explosion. That's my first one.
Jag.
Okay. So, as you guys know, I'm a bit of a history nerd. I love history. I love learning about the past. So when we came up with this idea, or James came up with this idea, I actually put together a list of going, well, what do I want to cover? Do I want to go serious with this and talk about some more of the serious things? Like you guys just cover some pretty serious topics. Or do I want to go the lighthearted way? And I kind of went more towards the lighthearted way.
There's a Chad.
And my first one, and for my first pick, I actually went local. I was like, why not? Why not go start out with a nice local history story? So I think this story would actually make a great movie, and it would actually make a great historical comedy. Got to talk about the Kentucky Meat Shower.
Oh,
That's
that's
good.
that's like a Lexington lawnmower.
It's gotta. It would make a great movie. And for those listeners who may not be aware of the Kentucky Meat Shower, let me give
I
you.
would be one of them.
Oh, you really don't know about this?
No, I really don't know about
Oh,
that.
it's a good
Oh,
one. It's
well,
a good
let me-
one. Yeah,
let me-
you're getting to learn something today.
Now this, because of the sake of time, I didn't really go in depth into this. But this is a really brief synopsis. So this actually occurred on March 3rd, 1886 in Olympia Springs, which is in Bath County, Kentucky.
I know where Bath County is.
Yeah. There was a couple called the Crouches. They were on their farm tending to their daily chores. Mrs. Crouch was on the porch making soap, and Mr. Crouch was tending to the farm. Suddenly, Miss Crouch is just on her porch, and she notices something fall in front of her into the yard. And she walks out into the yard and notices it's a piece of meat about 2 inches by 2 inches. Um, but as she's standing there, she all of a sudden, a literal shower of meat starts to fall down upon her. Again, it's 2 by 2 inches, but then sizes as big as 4 by 4 inches starts just falling all over the place. And the Crouches lose their mind. They literally think God is doing this to them. Now, this lasts for several minutes, and then suddenly it just stops. Now, what proceeds is the craziest series of events that you could ever think. The entire town ascends upon the Crouches farm to try to figure out what has just occurred. Not only that, scientists and random other doctors are all trying to figure out what is going on this farm. And it's days of people looking at this meat. Some people even bravely, to try to figure it out, start picking up the raw meat and eating it to try to determine its origin. Which some of them say, oh, it tastes like sheep or deer, maybe some cattle. I think one says it tasted like the lung of a cow. And it's just days of this, of people just talking, trying to figure out where this meat comes from. And to this day, there is no definitive explanation as to what occurred. Now, there are theories, but the most growing consensus is that this whole amazing incident is the result of a large group of vultures vomiting simultaneously.
Are you shitting me?
I am not shitting
No,
you.
look it up. Look it up. It's he's not making that history up. I knew that one.
No,
This
I'm
is a
not.
true-
I'm not that as the vulture thing.
They think it was a large flock of vultures vomiting simultaneously by either they found like a large cadre, a large supply of dead animals. It just went crazy and overfed, and they flew over and just had to vomit it all out onto the Crouches farm.
Hmm.
But that's the only. But there's still that's the theory, no proof of it. But the sheer insanity that occurred over those two to 3 days, I think, James, is how long it took.
Mhm.
Of people just ascending on this farm. I mean, it's not just Kentucky. People outside of Kentucky in 1876 came to this small rural farm to investigate this raining shower of meat. Insanity. And I think it would make a great historical comedy. I just do. I just do.
All
And
right.
by the way, that's my short one. Prepare for a long one on my next turnaround, guys.
All right. Well, my next one has had some stuff done about it. It's also a tragedy. Oh, I mean, I don't have anything really funny,
Oh, my next one's going to be even funnier.
but well, I don't know. Well, I wasn't laughing out loud, but this one's going to be definitely not laugh out loud
By
because
the way, thank you for that, Joe. Way to always just bring me down a peg.
oh no,
A
no.
whole peg.
Peg. When I peg, it's something totally different. Mine is, and I thought it was confusing to me because I thought there has to be, and all I can find is one TV movie. One TV movie. There's a BBC docudrama, which is funny because this is completely an American tragedy. And then of our friends in, I'm so sorry, I missed my little spot right here. I lost my spot. See, Chad, you got me back. Australia did one too. The drama did something about it's on the newsreader in 2021. But I can't believe that, especially since they're our age, that the Challenger and the Challenger explosion doesn't have more stuff about it. What do you all think? There's one ABC TV movie that was made in 1990.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, it's definitely something that was such a big part of everything, right? I mean,
Well, it was, but is it because we're of a certain age or what?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know if I have an answer.
I wanted to get both of your all's opinion on that. Is it because we're of a certain age because we lived through it? I mean, I remember where I was, and I used to use it as a shared moment when we'd talk about it in my class, and then everybody aged out. And now I can't even use September the 11th as a shared moment because most people don't remember that.
Now you have to
No,
do January 6th.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Although that doesn't seem to have the same. Maybe it's because I'm old and dead inside. It doesn't have the same as September the 11th did, but.
I don't think it does on anybody, honestly, because when it was on the news, I just kind of said, "Oh, that's happening," and flipped the
Yeah, that's
channel.
happening. This is all this
Yeah,
coming, right?
I wasn't too surprised by it. I mean, with the Challenger, I just feel like two things. One, it was a genuine tragedy.
O-ring tragedy.
What?
O-rings is the reason it blew up was the
Yeah.
O-ring.
Um, I just feel like they haven't made a movie out of it just because of it. I feel like maybe they haven't made a movie out of it just because of the fact that because of the fact that it hurt space exploration so much that if they make a movie about it now, when we're just trying to get back up into space, that it will prevent it from happening even more.
It's a good question. So I don't I was let's see, it's happened. My parents were still together, they were both sick at home, and I it was a snowy day and watched it live, and it was big news. And if you don't understand, if you're a little young and you're listening to us, that's odd because our audience doesn't skew that way. But it was a big deal because an American teacher was going up,
hmm
and a lot of people tuned in and a lot of kids tuned in, like across America,
yeah. Well,
because it was
if you
big
were,
news. It was in the classrooms across America to watch this. Like Chad was talking about, it was trying to get, to my understanding, more attention to the space,
Mm-hmm.
which had petered out in the mid to late 70s, like a lot of things, and we entered that whole world of
Make
post
money.
Viet post big money and post Vietnam. I would call it malaise, which it never really has left us. And what would you say? Millions of children watch it blow up.
yeah,
Yeah.
death
So
in the classroom. You watch somebody die while you were in class.
right. The only other time I can remember, of course, I wasn't at school then, but I think they would have because it was a snow day. But the only other time I can remember them bringing in a television, and of course, I went to Leslie County High School, and so everybody could watch one of those shared events.
It was OJ.
OJ,
Yep.
that you all got to do that too. I don't know. Have we talked
Yeah,
about
I
this
got to do
before?
that, and I still, even when they brought it in, I'm like, why are we doing this? I felt so weird doing that.
I don't remember feeling weird. I remember making jokes because that's how I deal with everything. But I don't. That's the only other time I remember any kind of thing like that is them bringing in the OJ verdict. James, did they do that for you all?
Yeah, yeah. No, I can remember. I mean, not every teacher did because I was in. I guess I would have been in high school at that point, right? Yeah. So, but certain teachers, yeah, it's like, oh, we switched period. Okay, this teacher's watching the OJ verdict. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that was what. So the first two that came to me was the War of 1812 and then the Challenger. And like I said, neither one of them are funny, but a little more serious than what I usually do. But I don't know why we haven't because we're talking about almost 40 years now.
hmm
And and it's extremely documented about how they had to go back and figure out what it was, and it was an O-ring, and it wasn't one person was to blame. It was a failure of many different checks and balances throughout the system that they fixed. And until was it Discovery many
Yep.
years later
Yeah.
that we didn't lose a spaceship. So I don't know. Is there a movie there? Is there not a movie there? I just was curious. We've made movies about a lot of other things that I don't know. That probably wasn't. Challenger was my number two.
All right, James, what do you got?
And to be honest, if I've talked about this figure before, I don't think I did for the episode about people that should have a thing. Maybe I did. If I did, though, actually, I want to say this entire time period needs more documentation because the more I dwell on it, the more I'm like, this sounds like it's a Ghostbusters villain. Like you could have this character pop up as an ancient, entity as a ghost, and you'd be like, okay, that works. It sounds like something out of Ghostbusters. Um, because he's just a fascinating. The more I think about it, the more I'm like, dude, it's almost like if he was looking for forbidden text or books of magic, you'd be like, that dude's a villain, right? If this was a film. Um, it's Ashurbanipal, which by the way is I learned something recently because I've read more books about him. That means Asher, creator of the air, hair, as in the next in line. But so Asher, to his friends, I guess, um, was one of the first, I guess, emperors we have on record. He was a Neo-Assyrian emperor from 669 BC till his death in 631. So what's really fascinating, and the reason he's not covered in a lot of history classes, we just started finding his stuff within the last 40 to 50 years. But what makes him fascinating to me as a nerd and as a guy that loves books is Ashurbanipal, Asher, I'm just going to use his short name, Asher, was obsessed with knowledge. He was probably the first dude that thought, you know what, knowledge is power. So much so that if you pull up some of his some images of him that have been recovered, the sculptures and things like that, he is the first emperor that would you they can identify him because he has one thing. He'll have his sword out, he'll have all that other stuff and the hieroglyphic type stuff, except it's him if there is it's not an ink pen. It would be and Chad, if you know the historical term for this, but it's what they used in clay tablets. It wasn't a pen, but it was, it's a marking. It's how they made the marks.
I don't remember the name of it. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
He has one in his belt. So whenever you see a
Emperor
hieroglyphic,
Emperor Asher, because I'm not having anything pull up.
Ashurban. Okay, so the his actual name that will pop up if you wanted to, for lack of a better term, Wikipedia is Ashurbanipal. Ashurbanipal. And if you do pull it up on Wikipedia, it'll show you what his name was in Sanskrit uh,
Gotcha.
and cuneiform, because cuneiform would have been what they would have kept. So his goal was, I'm going to collect all the knowledge of the world, period. So what he would do is he would send his people out, his scribes, to go, and he would go into places, and most of the time, allegedly, they would say, "Hey, can we get a copy of all your scrolls?" And allegedly, sometimes people would say yes, and his scribes would make copies of it. But more often than not, his scribes would just kill people and take their tablets,
Huh.
which is what we found about 40, maybe 50 years ago. I may be off, but it's a great history book. It's in the book Weavers, Kings, and Scribes. I think it's the name of the book. Um, it tells his history because we found it. So he built this library, arguably before the Great Library of Alexandria that everybody drools over. Yeah, he did it about 500 years before because he was convinced if he had all the knowledge, he had all the power. That wasn't completely
Which is,
wrong.
well, I was about to say he's not really wrong about that
No, I mean he. By the way, he wasn't
because they
supposed to
burned
be.
that library the last time I checked.
Yeah, he wasn't supposed to be the emperor. His older brother was supposed to be, but he got his place, and his brother got to be the emperor of Egypt. And they had trade deals and all that stuff. But guess which one had more power? It would be Ashurbanipal. Anyway, so it's a fascinating story because he keeps building this library. We found the library about 50 years ago. It was unearthed, and about 10,000 of the cuneiform tablets are still intact, and we're studying them still to this day. And we are learning about this guy that was obsessed with, I will send my scribes, who are also warriors. They will get me the records. They will bring the records, and I will store the records, and I will be the only one to have access to all the knowledge of the world.
Interesting.
It sounds like like I said, it sounds like a Ghostbuster villain almost, like this mad tyrant that's going to collect all the knowledge of the world. And that's exactly what he wanted to do. And he was insanely successful. Again, we get tons of movies about, the Egyptian pharaohs. This dude was doing stuff that makes what they do seem minor. He's a fascinating figure that honestly we really have only started to scratch the surface. If you do visit the British Museum, they have on display about I think 30 of the tablets that have been unearthed there. I don't read cuneiform. They didn't teach that in Eastern Kentucky, but just to
I
read the
swear to God, I didn't know what
translations.
it was till I was in my 30s.
Yeah. I mean, I knew I knew it was a
I
language.
didn't. Chad, did you know?
All I can say is, how's it feel to be an uneducated hick?
About like this.
Who's that aimed at? Um,
About
but
about 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 like I do right now.
feel pretty good. I'll be honest. I don't stress about that stuff. I have never
I
been in
mean,
a
God bless to
situation,
movies. Most of my education came from movies.
but I'll be honest. I don't think I'm ever going to be in a situation in my current lifestyle where it's going to be, oh crap, I'm going to die if I don't translate this cuneiform
James,
tablet.
obviously, this son of a bitch skipped out on the Prince of Egypt.
I do they talk about it in the Prince of
Sure,
Egypt?
they do. You need to go back and watch it.
Do I? I didn't
No,
care
I
for it
don't
when I
know.
saw it in the theater.
I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble. I don't know if I've ever seen the Prince of Egypt. I've seen parts of it on TV, but
I actually think I may have saw that at
It's
the
the best. It's
cinema.
noted for being the best animated movie of all time. Jesus.
It's about
huh.
Jesus.
Yeah, sort of.
Well, I mean, his good buddy.
Jesus
I
is
don't
good buddy. Now that's the
Yeah.
movie we need to do.
By the way, so I would say for
You
some
like that
reason
Life of Brian? Well, you're gonna love the
God,
Boneheads when they
isn't
take on
Moses
Jesus, good buddy.
I was going to say, well, here's the funny thing about that, and this popped in my head randomly
isn't
today.
Moses voiced by Val Kilmer? I gotta look that up now.
I think so. You may
Yeah,
be right.
one of them is voiced by Brad Pitt.
Oh, that is
I,
just no.
I
That's Sinbad, isn't it? That's Sinbad.
What's the
aren't
difference?
they the same? No, I was going. By the way, though, Joe, it's funny
I
you
don't
bring
got
that
none
up.
of that Queeno form.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
it's
Brad
funny
Pitt's not in that. Yeah, Val Kilmer is Moses, and Ralph Fiennes is Ramses.
Oh,
it's funny.
uneducated holler rat. Hold on, sir. Ray Fiennes.
It's funny you bring up us doing a movie called Jesus is Good Buddy.
Oh
Jesus
my
is
God,
good
guys!
buddy.
I
So
had.
the
Oh,
Egyptian god Hotep. Anybody want to guess who voices that?
I hope it's
No.
Bruce Campbell.
Close. Steve Martin.
That's fair.
King Tut.
Um, uh, but
That makes
anyway,
no
it's
sense
funny.
to me. I have no
It,
desire to go back. Well, now I kind of want to watch it just to see what a train wreck it is.
it's
You
funny
know,
you bring that up though, Joe. Seriously about Jesus, but I don't know why. I had I told you all before we started film. I had a bit of an episode today, and I don't know why. Right after I had my anger episode,
On a
I
very
was sitting.
special episode of Blossom and James.
I need to go look. I don't know if Hotep's actually an Egyptian god or just some sidekick god. Like,
It's
anyway, go ahead,
Bubba.
sorry.
I had a little bit of an anger episode. I was a bit of an anger ball earlier today, but
Yeah.
then later on, I was driving to take my kids to the optometrist to get their eyes checked.
Because you poked them out, because you were screaming and poking their eyes,
No,
saying,
that's
"Why,
not
I
what I
gouged
did.
thee. I
Um,
gouged thee.
if your eye offends me, I shall take it. No, no,
I
no,
shall
that's not
take
what.
it out.
Um, but
Bitch.
I honestly thought about. I don't know why. It's fun. It's just funny.
Shouldn't
I
call
couldn't.
sauce
None
that.
of this is scripted. None of this is scripted. You mentioned that, and earlier today I was driving, and for some reason a scene popped in my head, and it was Jesus and the fishes and the loaves, the miracle. And then for some reason it popped in my head, and then everybody forgets when Darren, Jesus' roommate, showed up with the dips, the tartar sauce and the ketchup. Nobody gives Darren any credit.
I give Darren credit because I love a good dip.
I know, with the garlic sauce or the garlic butter for the bread.
Much
He didn't
like
want.
Martin Short's character in Only Murders in the Building, I love a good dip.
Anyway, sorry. I don't know why. I just wanted to share because none of that was scripted. You mentioned that, and it just made me think I'm not the only one thinking about Jesus' good buddy. Jesus' good buddy Darren showing up helping everybody out.
I'm thinking about it right now. Jesus is
Anyway,
good buddy.
Asher,
I could sell that. I could sell that. Nobody watched
Asher,
it.
no, would do. I don't know if I know you all don't pay attention to Twitter most of the time, but Bonehead pitched a show to Laurel Hightower yesterday called Little Mothy and the Cryptid Kids.
Yeah. Did she say okay?
She said actually originally I pitched the idea of it's like Murder She Wrote, except she only investigates supernatural stuff. And
Yeah.
and she was like, "Oh no, I totally watched that." And I'm like, "Good, I'm basing it on you." And we reserve the right that if the ratings droop, second season you get a partner, and it's just Mothman and a London Rippers defunct baseball team hat, and he just calls you boss all the time. And she goes, maybe that should be how we start season one. This entire conversation happened, and you all are not on social media enough to catch these.
Well, it truthfully yesterday I accidentally was working.
I see. That's good. It's going to catch up with you. You ever hear anybody say, "Oh, he died on social media"? No, but tons of people die at work.
I agree. I agree. Is it time for Chad?
Asher Banapal. Yes. Let's move on.
Thank you.
19, oh, sorry, not 19, 1888 Spalding Baseball World Tour.
You had me at Spalding Donuts.
You had me at tour. 3 hours. Let's go.
And yes, it is that Spalding of the Spalding Sports Company.
Not the donuts.
Nope.
God,
This actually tour started in 1888 and was mostly financed by Albert Spalding. It was actually the tour was created by another person. It's just Spalding lied and took full credit for creating this. He didn't. He just put up some money for it. The goal of the tour was to promote the new sport of professional baseball to the entire world because at that time, professional baseball wasn't a huge thing at that time. It honestly was mostly just on the East Coast, and was just played in that area. Not
where
a
they
lot
had
of
the
people,
hot dogs.
yeah, not a lot of people knew about it at that time. Now, again, I'm just going to go over some of the highlights so you all can see just what kind of movie could be made out of this story. The tour automatically started off poorly when three players who were supposed to start off on this tour were arrested for messing around with a married woman.
You had me at married woman.
Yeah, because you could get arrested back then at that in those days for that.
What kind of chicken shit outfit are we in here?
Hold on,
Now-
hold on. Wait, should we get this triple murder over here? No, no, no. I think that guy's committing infidelity.
Now, this tour would only consist of two teams. The first was Albert's own team, the Chicago White Stockings, now known as the Chicago White Sox.
Bears.
And they would face a combination or an all-star team consisting of various players of all the other existing pro teams in the country. Now, they also needed to fill in some time, as entertainment. So they hired, I'm not making any of this up. They hired a one-eyed hot air balloon trapeze artist.
You had me at one-eyed hot. What is it again?
A one-eyed hot air balloon trapeze artist to entertain the crowd after the game because they wanted people to stay for the whole game. So they told people that they would have this after the game, so they would actually stay to watch the game because they were afraid people would get bored because nobody knew what baseball was across the world. Now, here's how this would work. This man would use the baseball players to stoke flames to heat these balloons that had a rope attached to them. They would go up 2,000 feet in the air. He would then walk a trapeze across the balloons back and forth, do his thing. He would then proceed to jump off the balloons with a parachute in 1888, mind you, and then fall to the ground, parachute, do a few tricks while he was diving, and then land. This was an amazing trick done for the most part successfully. At one point in Ballarat,
one time,
except for one time in Ballarat, Australia, he did his act. The parachute took too long to open. He hit a hotel chimney and proceeded to only cut his knee, but he was out of play for about a month at that time. Also, back then, they were really all about mascots back in the day for luck. so they needed a mascot for the tour. So they hired a very short African American man uh, to be their mascot. Now, this presented a couple of problems during the tour. One, this little short man actually attracted more women, which pissed off the players because the women were more interested in this man than they were them. But also as well, when they were shipping between Australia and Asia, the crew was German, and the way that they dressed it wasn't them, but this guy was from a theater group, so he had his own costumes. The way he dressed, the Germans actually thought he was royalty, so they treated him more special than they did the actual players, which pissed off one of the owners because, believe it or not, it's 1888, really racist. So they didn't like this, so they actually traded the mascot to the crew, and for the rest of the trip, the mascot had to manually pull a rope to fan the people in the dining area. So again, we'll keep going. Players would get incredibly hammered the night
Holy
before.
shit, you're still going. You're right. Sorry, keep going. I thought you were joking. Keep going.
Players would get really hammered and not be able to perform, or they would just go completely hungover and not be able to perform up to expectations. In Australia, as I mentioned before, they would attract huge crowds. However, nobody knew what baseball was, so what they relied on was they would hand out books to explain the rules. Of course, nobody read them, so then people would come to the game and have no idea what was going on. So they were completely confused. In Cairo, but I will say this: in Australia, it was such a success that they actually founded 3 baseball clubs, and Spalding was able to open 3 stores. In Cairo,
How did they get cricket? Joke. Keep going.
In Cairo, the players the players had to ride camels and donkeys for 3 hours because the owners wanted them to play at the pyramids. However, what's the big problem with the pyramids? Sand.
Yeah.
So they forced the players to play a full baseball game on sand. So needless to say, wasn't a really successful game because they kept falling. The ball wouldn't bounce. Comedy ensued. After the game was played, the players, all they wanted to do was get drunk. So what they do to pass time? They decided to play a game of who could hit the Sphinx right eye with baseballs. So they just proceeded to chuck baseballs at the Sphinx right eye for the rest of the night while they stood there. In Naples, they went to Naples, and none of them could speak Italian. So the crowd just kept encroaching onto the field as they were playing, and nobody could tell them to back off. At one point, a spectator was knocked out from a baseball, and the crowd thought they were attacking this person. So the crowd rioted and started attacking the players.
And that America is how we got
during
Joe
the tussle,
Piscopo.
one of the members of the losing team decided to cheat, and through a technicality, he stole home base, which would result in them actually winning the game. So he stole home base during the riot. So when it was clear they couldn't find home base, and they didn't actually win by technicality, but he tried. He tried his best. And on the way to France to play, they got kicked off the train that they were on because one of the drunken players refused to pay for a ticket for his pet monkey that was given to him on the tour. So then they got kicked off the train and had to figure out a way to their next stop in France. And then in France, they had to play on gravel, which resulted in their best player, the best player at that time in baseball in the late 1800s. They played on gravel. He ended up bashing his knee into gravel, cutting it wide open. It got infected, ruined his career. Albert Spalding refused to pay for any medical treatment. It actually ended up killing him several years later from this infection that he got. Also, too, France actually got there. Once they got there, France accused them of stealing the game of baseball from a children's game that they had created several years ago. Now, the most important part about this that the movie could explore is that once they got back to America, Albert Spalding completely screwed the players that were there, took away their league, took away any chance they had of making money. He also, because of the popularity of the tour, was able to take full power of baseball. And also, guys, he invented the whole creation of how baseball got started. It wasn't Albert Doubleday, and it did not happen in Coopertown, but he was able to spin it because of the popularity of this tour.
Yeah, because
So there you
baseball,
go.
variations of baseball had been played.
James, you're
Sorry.
muted.
Am I really?
I can hear him.
Yeah,
Joe, you're muted too.
No, it's you.
It's
you.
me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's you, Taylor Swift.
No wonder I kept interrupting him for several of these things. No wonder he wasn't paying attention.
Yeah, I
Why
was
do you,
talking
no wonder
over him.
there's an issue. So because there was the monkey could just sit on his lap.
Yeah, the monkey could have sat on his lap, but
Well, you
on
don't
top
have
of
to
that,
pay for a toddler to get on a plane. That's
yeah,
just a
sit on
bunch
your
of.
lap.
So you're saying
know-
a rich white dude reconstructed history.
and
I
that's
don't
the funny.
believe a word of that.
It's the funny part about that is I wrote recently about the history of baseball, for colleges, and Jed is
We need to
absolutely right.
pause. We were
Yeah,
gonna
okay.
pause. Well, I pushed pause.
Do we need to redo it? Because I didn't hear anything y'all said.
No, I don't think I think the audience heard it and you just kept right on going. So I think we're good.
It's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
we got
It's
the
funny
story,
that you
which is
just
really
ignored us for 20 minutes.
Okay.
now that part there, Admiral, where you had your
you
hearing
just
aid
kept
off.
on talking, and James or I was like, "Why can't the monkey sit on his lap?"
So
Why can't the
luckily, I
monkey-"
didn't hear these two douches talking because my headphones had apparently crapped out. So I was able to get through my segment unabated.
Oh, you were baited.
I mean, it
When
was
when
pretty
people
bait.
go back and
I
listen
baited
to
quite a
it,
bit.
we go back and listen to it. We're talking because at one point I say, "Well, wait," but you. By the way, what
I even
did
made a
say-
comment. I was like, "Oh shit, no, this is still going."
No, I heard
What-
that part, and
what
then
I
I
did-
cut you off.
What I
Because
did,
God forbid, when Joe talks and we talk over him, he gets pissed.
That's
what
not
I
true.
did
I just
say
ignore
though,
you.
and I don't know if we had cut off the microphone or not by this point, or if we had paused it since we realized there was technical issues. But you're absolutely right. The Doubleday things, because baseball had been a sport. It wasn't called baseball.
Right.
There was a sport called baseball. There was, and it was so variations of this have been around forever. And so your point about Doubleday and that all being, let's just say, fantasized, is you're right. There's a lot there.
He took his power from this tour and used it to spin it into creating the history of baseball, which it became an American sport, which it wasn't. It was a British sport.
Yeah, and that's because that's where baseball came from, and women were allowed to play it.
Yeah.
It was considered a safe game for women to play because it was not too strenuous.
Right.
So, yeah, absolutely.
All right, Joe.
All right, here's my last one. So when I went to do, and mine's not as long as Chad's, but when I went to do this, the first two I usually always do research, and I didn't because the first two, right on top of my head, these are the two I want to talk about. The third one was like pulling teeth. So then I had to go do research, and I was shocked because if you just Google movies about events that haven't or events that need movies made about them, there are so many of them that have so many movies about them. I don't know who these a-holes are. Well, I could go back and read you to who these are, but I mean, there was one talking about Nuremberg, and I thought, have we not seen Judgment? I mean, it's just I like no one. Do people just post things on the internet that aren't true?
Yeah, I've got bad news for you, Joe. What's really funny, by the way, Joe, is to get
Judgment in Nuremberg.
Yes, to get anything published, I have to go through at least double blind peer review where people can rip me apart. But it turns out I can get on the internet and say whatever I want, and more people are likely to read it than the articles that I publish. But neither here nor there.
I found a really wonderful website.
I found out today, Cotton Eye Joe's about STDs.
I did not know that. And it's something called Raymond Meester, whatever. But they had a really good list of 10 historical events that nobody has really done a lot about. And the one I'm going to read or talk about is I thought this would just be interesting because we use these words a lot in our culture and we even use the word Babylon. But what is Babylon? Why is that? And one of the great ones is the rise of Babylon in the 6th century. So in the 7th century BC, Babylon was destroyed twice by the Assyrians, but it was resurrected from the ruins. And under Nabopolassar, Babylon escaped Assyrian rule. And he allied with the armies to finally destroy the Assyrian Empire sometime between 626 BC and 609 BC. We're not quite for sure.
That which is after Ashurbanipal.
Yeah. And
So
during the reign of his son, and for our religious people, because this is what triggered this, and this is the reason why I actually grabbed this particular part of history. Nebuchadnezzar the second, most of Mesopotamia was conquered. So this got him a bad reputation after the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem. Now, why would that be? And how would he end up in a book? Why would Nebuchadnezzar conquer a people and end up in a book that we talk about later today? Right?
I don't know, Joe. I'm
Jerusalem.
sure.
Who was in Jerusalem, James?
I have no idea. I'm sure it
Jews.
was. I'm
Yeah,
sure it
they
was
were
a
deported
peaceful
to.
thing, and there would be no further issues
There
from
were
then
no further
on.
issues. So apparently, if you look at it from another perspective, which is what we sometimes do, seems like Nebuchadnezzar during the time wasn't really quite what the Bible says he was.
What?
What? I know. I thought some of this was interesting to me, but anyway. So he deported a lot of the Jews to Babylon, that's bad, and they bashed him about it in some little book called the Bible. Nebuchadnezzar also, though, credited with the construction of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world.
Yep.
That was him. So their idea was to make like a movie where you start, the point is Babylon is destroyed for the second time, and we show the recovery of the empire all the way to it became the biggest city in the world at the time of almost 200,000 people. I
Yep.
just find it fascinating because there's a lot of those things that we haven't really done. The other couple ones, and these are just, I'm not going to talk about them, but one of their number one was the building of Stonehenge.
But by the way, Joe, do you think one of the reasons, and I'm just thinking,
There's a lot of
I don't,
movies about Stonehenge. They're
yeah,
being very specific about the building of Stonehenge, or a
but
lot of movies use Stonehenge in a completely different kind of thing.
but going back to your first example there, the Nebuchadnezzar and the all Babylon and
Yeah.
all that. Do you think one of the reasons it would be impossible to make that movie today? Because I was watching, and it's making the rounds on social media, and I don't recommend seeking it out. But the couple that posted their video about how they had to storm out of Deadpool and Wolverine within the first 5 minutes because they felt it was sacrilegious. Do you think if you made a movie and you tried to do the historic Nebuchadnezzar, you would risk that same population?
That's the number two reason, or number two, and definitely in the top three. My number one is that we are so piss poorly educated, nobody knows what the fuck it is.
That's probably yeah.
That's my
If
number
you know
one.
it, you probably know it because of religion.
You will know Nebuchadnezzar, and the only reason I knew Nebuchadnezzar is because I was raised that way.
Because he watched The Matrix.
Oh, well, yeah, I guess that's the name of the ship in the Matrix.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it's not that reason, but it's because I was raised that
Sure,
way.
it's not.
And number two, Babylon, I think a lot of people know Babylon or think of Babylon, but they don't really know jack shit about Babylon.
Well, it's a space
And I'd be
station. There
one
were
of those people.
five
It's
of
about
them.
the spectacle. It's about the what?
There were space stations. There were five of them. See, the last one was Babylon 5, and it's the last
No,
best
it was
hope.
that movie with Margot Robbie.
Okay, you went like I was obscure-ish. Not really obscure. A lot of people know Babylon 5, but you,
Truthfully, I
sir.
was thinking more about Babylon the movie as well than I was Babylon 5.
Now,
But
how
yes,
about Babylon AD with Vin Diesel?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I don't even know if I've ever seen it.
I
Is
did,
that
and
the
I
one where
remember.
he's trying to save a kid?
Yeah.
I have
It's not.
seen it, but I don't remember anything about it.
It's not the one about family.
Was it? I don't give a shit. If he's not racing a car and talking about family, I don't
All
give a
right, sir. I will also defend Triple X because that's a lot of fun if you don't think too
and you
much.
know what? I'm an idiot. My favorite Vin Diesel movies are Pitch Black and Riddick. So there you go.
Well, and
No, it's
Find Me
not.
Guilty.
Find me guilty.
Yes, there you go.
That's his
Yep,
best
Find Me Guilty.
performance.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just thought I wanted to make that
it's
point because
okay. According to
I was
Chad, I now have to stab you. Stand
uh,
still. I'll be over there in a minute.
make it quick.
No,
If the alarm's on, I'll turn it off. I don't want you to have to deal with that buzzing.
I don't want to deal with the buzzer. Will you stab? Can we have a mutual stabbing? Because I don't. I feel the same way you do. So
Oh,
the malaise has overtaken me.
mm. I
Mm.
like Malays, but I
I
prefer
like to dip. I
mayonnaise.
like to dip my rolls in some of that good malaise. They get it out of
Oh,
that tree. James.
oh, is it me?
Babylon.
Um, so yeah, I, this is a tragic one. This is a tragic one because I think a lot of people didn't know about the Tulsa Race Massacre, but it has now creeped into pop culture where people know it, right?
I
Yeah.
agree.
Watchmen,
That's true.
Watchmen,
Pop culture taught me about
Lovecraft
that.
Country.
Yeah.
yeah, Lovecraft Country. So but there's another one, gentlemen, that has not, and I want to talk about it because it predates. So the Tulsa Race Massacre, um, was that event happened in 1921. That was predated by one that is absolutely terrible, but at the same time had a weird unity to it. Let me tell you a little story. So, them Californians.
Mm-hmm.
So in California, it was always a weird. It was always a mix of people because California, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, we got California became and a lot of the West became part of the United States, had previously been part of Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. So it always had a pretty large Hispanic population. And then you had the European white settlers that also went out to settle, let's say. Well, the problem was, gentlemen, that after the Civil War, you had a pretty large Hispanic population. You had a pretty large white population, and they didn't always get along. But it turns out there was one thing that brought these people together, and that was their mutual need
I was going to say,
to
hey,
kill the Chinese.
yeah.
In a event that is not covered in history at all and needs to be quote unquote rediscovered like the Tulsa Race Massacre, there was what was called the Los Angeles Chinese Massacre of 1871.
Yeah, I don't know about it.
In this event, the approximately 500 white and Latino Americans, using modern terminology, um, had heard that there were two rival Chinese gangs and they were having a disagreement. Well, rumors spread that they had killed that, and it was true. A police officer died who was investigating the fights between these two gangs, and a police officer was killed. But that became, oh, they killed a white police officer, and all of a sudden it elevated to they're killing every white person they can find. And under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Hispanic people were also considered white. So the Hispanic population and the quote unquote European white population got together and they said, we've got to stop them. Now here's the two rival gangs, which would have actually been rival tongs at this time, using the terminology of China, were the Ninyang and the Hongqiao. And they were fighting against each other. But it was not fighting like, we would think about rival gangs. This wasn't Crips and Blood. For one
This
very
isn't the
important
opening of Big Trouble in Little China. Or I guess
no
it's the third scene in Big Trouble in Little China.
no because gentlemen, there were only 172 people of Chinese descent in all of Los Angeles at this time, and they killed over 10% of those
Ooh.
in one night. And how did they do it, gentlemen? They lynched them.
Yep.
It is the largest lynching on record in American history. And if you know anything about how terrible American history is, that's not a small feat. Matter of fact, often they would mutilate them after they lynched them. There is records of them cutting jewelry off their hands because once you lynch somebody, their body starts to swell and it's hard to get jewelry off them. So you just cut off that body part to get the
I
jewelry
did
off.
not know that. I'm glad you just taught me that horrible, horrible thing.
Yep, just keep that in your head at night. Think about that tonight while you slumber.
While I
Um,
slumber.
uh, now they did investigate it when they finally said, "Oh my God, you killed 10% of the population of this population. You can't get away with this." They did put 10 men from the mob of 500. They picked 10 of them and went, "Okay, you guys have to stand trial."
That's some
But
unlucky sons of bitches, by the way.
no, it was all, dude. You want to talk about a rigged court? Every
That's got to
single
be. Nobody likes Greg. Greg,
yeah, Greg, you're one of the 10.
go get him,
Um,
Greg.
but mysteriously, all those convictions got overturned on technicalities, and nobody was held responsible. So the largest lynching in American history was at one time, obviously, was of the Chinese in Los Angeles in 1871. And to be honest, if I hadn't researched years ago the Chinese Education Mission and the Chinese Education Acts that happened right after the Civil War, I wouldn't know about this either. It is one of the most messed up things in American history. And again, it would be a terribly, terrible, heartbreaking movie to watch, but it's a compelling moment because again, it's really funny that there was this rivalry between the Hispanics and the whites, and the only thing in 1871 where they were like, well, we can put aside our differences as long as we're going to kill those people.
Hmm.
And it shows that we still have a lot to learn about the racism and the biases and all this stuff that are present in our history. And I have an honorable mention, but I'm going to shut up so Jack can go.
I'm just going to ask you guys one name. Let me know if you've heard of it. Ona Judge.
I know that name. Why do I
Judd?
know that name?
Then that's Naomi's dad.
That's
No.
Winona. Oh, wait, no.
So,
Naomi's Winona's mom.
this is one of those stories. It's never been so I picked these three purposefully because they've never been a movie. And this is one of those ones that's never been a movie, and to this day, I don't know why.
Oh, I do know this one. Yeah, I know why. Okay, yep. Go ahead. Sorry.
So again, this is that whole America, we put a blinder on our founding fathers, or these great men who founded our country. They were great men, smart, idealistic. We're building a great future.
Handsome,
Handsome,
charming.
charming.
Reminds me of me.
Kind of reminds
However,
me too.
we tend to overlook the darker sides of these men. In particular, our first president, George Washington.
Do. Oh, you've talked about him before.
Yeah.
I knew I couldn't. I was why I couldn't remember the name. Yeah.
So Ona Judge was one of George Washington's slaves. Now, back then, when our country was founded, several states decided they didn't want to keep slaves. Other states decided they wanted to keep slaves going. As a result, there was a certain rule in place. If slaves were allowed to stay in a state for a certain amount of time, if it was a free state, those slaves became free. So what George Washington liked to do, because Washington, D.C. was technically in a free state, he would keep slaves there for a certain amount of time. But then when that time was starting to expire, he would move them back to Virginia, trade them out for another set of slaves, and so on and so forth. Ona was one of his favorite slaves, his and Martha's favorite slaves. Well, one day Martha had decided that she was going to gift Ona to one of her nieces. Now, her niece was not a nice person. Ona knew this. Ona knew that if she was going to go to this niece, she was going to be abused. So on one of her treks to Virginia, Ona decided it was time to leave. So Ona escaped the Washingtons. From there on, at that point, Ona had to constantly be on the move as the Washingtons relentlessly pursued her to get her back. To the point where George Washington, at one point, even was going to use our government tax money to capture his lost slave. One slave, Ona Judge. And this woman continually fled from them. And Martha Washington, again, America's founding mother, who's this sweet, wholehearted woman, all she wanted was her slave back so she could give it to her niece. She didn't care that this was a person. She just wanted the gift back so she could give this thing, not a person. And again, Ona Judge spent the rest of her life on the run from the Washingtons. And her life was a tragedy. I mean, and it deserves a movie. I mean, it got to the point where she had 3 sons. All 3 sons died in various ways. But it's a tragic story that should be told. Her story is a story of perseverance, of never going back into slavery, regardless of the couple, who is the most powerful couple in the country, the original president of the United States. And again, we hold this man up to the highest regard, and he was willing to do anything to get this one person back to control her.
It's really funny you talk about that though, Chad, because I think that's what and if you get a chance, if you're anywhere near that area, I recommend checking it out. So George Mason University is named after George Mason.
No.
Yeah, it turns out it's true. You verify me.
Named after Leif Erikson, you say.
But you know what's really funny about George Mason University? It's new in the grand scheme of American history.
Yeah.
George Mason University didn't open until 1949. So why is it named after George Mason? Because he was the last founding father, signer of the Declaration of Independence, et cetera, left. There weren't he was the next available big name. And they were like, well, we need to honor everybody that signed it. But here's a funny story about that. And it ties into exactly what you're talking about. George Mason wrote against slavery. He did so while his manservant, slave, was holding the candlelight.
Yeah.
He was a bit of a hypocrite. Well, what's really funny, and the reason I said visit the campus if you get a chance, because he was born in 1725, died in 1792. When they built his statue on campus, and again, remember the campus didn't open until 1949, but he fell out of, he went in and out of favor, kind of like Hamilton. Hamilton's a better example because the musical people know. He went in and out of favor with the other founding fathers so much that when they built the statue on campus to honor him, which wasn't built till the 1960s, it's facing, if you knew where the White House was, he's facing away from it because he turned his back on the other founding father. That's what he wanted.
Yeah.
He always had it set up that way. He did not, but that caused a problem because when they investigated, they found that he started enslaving, he liked some of his slaves young. And they found the names of these kids.
As did one other founding father named Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah. And what's funny, so they have went, if you go visit the campus, and it's a cool art display, but it also has great history. They have his statue, the original statue they built of him in the 60s, but they have now reframed it. Penny was the name of the young slave he got to serve him and his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And they have built a framework statue of her. And so when you stand, and if you're the height that Penny was, and you stand at her thing, she now frames him, right? So if you stand at a certain angle, you can only see him through the way she would have saw it. It's a very fascinating art display. And then they found the name of his manservant, which was James, and they built another thing where you can stand and see how James would have saw it. And it's fascinating. It's the way they updated it to say, no, we're not tearing down the statue, but we're going to have these 2 other perspectives that when you stand where they are and you see this founding father, you get a real view of what this man was. And it's a great way to contextualize it without destroying statues. Anyway, so your story made me think about that because yes, so many of our founding fathers were there's that famous painting of them signing the Declaration of Independence, and then somebody went back and and painted over the only three. I think there were only three that didn't own slaves,
Yeah.
and the rest of them did out of all the signers. So yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think Ona Judges is a story that needs to be told. And I can't believe there's never been a movie based on her. I mean, we've seen Harriet Tubman's story, and rightfully so. We need to see Harriet Tubman's story because again, it's an amazing story, but never a story on Ona Judge.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
So yeah, it's a great story.
I've
Honorable,
got two honorable mentions.
I
I
don't
don't
have
know.
any honorable mentions.
You want
Go
me
ahead.
to just go ahead?
Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
I've got a couple.
these are one of these is a straight up. And matter of fact, I think I haven't seen that season, but I think American Horror Story adapted some of it. But I think the fact that one of the most lethal Eileen Wuornos gets a lot of credit for being a female serial killer. Um, I think we've got to talk about Mary Delphine McCarty, also known as Madame LaLaurie. Um,
Yeah, I do remember watching that season.
Yeah, with Kathy Bates playing the character.
I have not seen it, obviously, but
Right.
that real story is absolutely horrifying.
Yeah,
Like the fact that they were basically doing medical experimentation and all this other stuff on slaves, and even the ones that weren't being experimented on, like chaining the cook to the stove 24 hours a day. It's she was a serial killer. I mean, she was a serial killer.
yeah.
Um, and so that would be one. The other one I want to talk about is because it scarred my kids for life. Um, so much so. So there, I don't know if y'all are familiar with uh the I Survived series for kids. Like
Yeah.
it's young adult readers, but
Haley's my youngest daughter, my oldest daughter's read every one of them.
yeah. So my kids loved them too. So I Survived the Titanic. That tells the true story about somebody that survived these
I survived the
catastrophes.
blizzard of 18 something. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think now they do have a I Survived 9/11. I think that's actually a real one that came out now. Um, so my kids read these, and for a while I was like, I survived the Great Fire of Chicago. All
Yeah.
these historic ones. What one caused my kids to run in and say, my eldest child run in and say, um, "Daddy, I don't want you to die that way." That would be the one, gentleman, about the Great Molasses Flood, January 15th,
Well, I only have
1919.
one honorable mention now.
Dude, so I'm glad you know about it
Oh
because
yeah.
what a horrible way to die.
It's just absolutely awful.
I
I
mean,
mean, I'm sure it's bad, but did you get any of those good biscuits?
boiled alive in syrup, dude. I don't know.
I
Um,
mean,
and,
getting
and
there.
and so,
Austin, right?
yep, yep, 2.3 million U.S. gallons, or Joe for you, 8,700 cubic meters, of
I have heard of this
molasses
before. I didn't know it was where it was located, but I have heard of this one before.
weighing approximately 13,000 tons burst, and the resultant wave of molasses rushed through the streets at an estimated 35 miles per hour, killing 21 people and injuring 150.
Yeah.
Allegedly, there's people that claim on really hot summer days, you can still smell the molasses where it got soaked into the soil.
And Granny. She was
Well,
also soaked into the
it's
soil.
just soil. Um,
Screaming, what a world. What a world. What a world. I can't believe this is
uh,
fucking molasses. What a world. Holy shit. I just wanted to go out and get some denture cream. Holy
I was
shit.
gonna say, I thought you were gonna say Granny just wanted to go out like she came into this world smothered by 15 men.
She was, but they were all
Um,
also smothered by molasses.
so yeah, the temperature had been frigid, and then it rose quickly, and even though it only got up to 40 degrees, the containers of the molasses couldn't adapt to that rapid change, and they burst, and they flooded the city and killed people. Um, and so there were places even far away from the city where the molasses got up to the waist level.
Hmm.
And that was if it hit you after it cooled, yeah, it sucked for you, but you at least lived. But there were people that died by molasses. Now,
Fucking Democrats.
Joe,
Yeah.
here's the funny thing. I've given you molasses, and evidently Chad was going to as well. I'm sorry I stole that from you, Chad.
That's okay. I got another one.
But Chad also talked about the following meat.
Yeah.
Why couldn't we have a chicken and waffle time?
I don't know.
It could have happened. Could have been a good time. Didn't, to my knowledge. Maybe there's a history of chicken and waffles killing people that I don't know about. Anyway, Chad, go ahead. What's your honor?
More slow.
So my two honorable mentions is I can't believe there's never been a movie based on Mansa Musa, the 14th century Western African ruler who was basically so rich
How rich was he?
he would bankrupted an entire country just because he was so generous with his money.
There's a
Now,
lot of those
Chad,
historically throughout. I don't not to interrupt, but seriously, there's a lot of those because there wasn't a lot of checks and balances, and these kings, queens, whomever, just royalty would go through these towns and kill them because they would raise, and then there would be such a sharp depression after they left. The people ended up starving. Sorry.
Well, no, he was literally the first one to known to do that from the 14th century. But yeah,
Really? From the 14th century? I thought they went back all the way to BC.
Maybe I'm wrong.
Chad, I think, and I'll double check this, but I think actually, well, I'll make my bad joke first. I'm pretty sure, Chad, that he is also involved in the summoning of the Mouska-Tools. Musamasa, Mouska-Tools, anybody? That's a 3%.
He is considered the richest man of all time, though.
Well, I was gonna say, so there is, and if you're familiar with the epic rap battles of history, they have one where he squares off against Jeff Bezos, which is pretty funny.
Yeah.
So he does get at least reference there. So there's at least, again, historians know who he is. But yep.
And then the other one that would be birthed in a movie, I think, would be the Battle of Saunders Field, where two soldiers this is during the Civil War. This is the only Civil War movie I would be interested in making, where a Union soldier and a Confederate soldier started taunting one another, and it ended up in a fist fight, and it actually stopped the fight, the battle altogether, for both sides to watch these two people duke it out. And it was agreed upon before the fight that whichever one lost the fight would surrender to the losing side, to the other side. I'm sorry. So, and it was literally a 10 or 15 minute fist fight, and it both sides watched as these two people pummeled one another.
Chad, I think that's already been adapted. It's called Rocky IV. Ended the Cold War, Chad. Rocky IV.
So yeah, I think I think it would make a good movie.
Get Ivan Drago.
Those
you
are
get
my
Dolph
two
Lundgren right there.
All right. Is that it?
I'm sure there's other. And by the way, if we didn't talk about one, maybe one of our listeners had something that happened in your town, and you're like, why hasn't that ever been a movie? Let us know. Give us comments. Give us feedback. Tell us where we can go.
Other than hell.
Already there, dear.
And if you have some sort of really kind of scenic route, I mean, we may be open to it. We love a road trip.
We could go to hell for certain.
I've been there.
I know. I drove through it once, and I can't remember why.
I don't know why you'd have either. This has been Bonehead Weekly.